Welcome to Where Food and Climate Intersect, Solution Stories from Los Angeles. My name is Drew Arietta. I'm the storytelling coordinator at Project Drawdown, and it is my deep pleasure to introduce Matt Scott. Matt Scott, him is the director of storytelling and engagement at Project Drawdown and the founding director of Drawdown Stories, where he helps everyday people connect with climate solutions. He hosts Drawdown's Neighborhood, a climate solutions docuseries highlighting local climate heroes across the US. Previously, Matt led the global community engagement for NASA's Space Apps Challenge, the world's largest problem-solving hackathon, earning two NASA awards while also collaborating with organizations like the UN, USAID, Nike, the Obama White House. Matt's work on Drawdown Stories has been featured by the Weather Channel, National Geographic, Grist, PBS, FEMA, NOAA, the Society of Environmental Journalists, and the Hollywood Climate Summit, and more. And so it's such a treat and pleasure that I get to work with Matt Scott. And so really excited that I get to introduce him. And for folks who don't know, Project Drawdown is a US-based 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we are a nonpartisan, science-based org committed to stopping climate change. So thank you so much for joining us, Matt, and leading this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Drew, for that introduction, that amazing introduction. If we could just give it up for Drew in the chat with the reactions. Drew is a phenomenal part of our storytelling team, and it's always great to see the love from him, and great to see where everyone's joining from all over, not only the United States, but all over the world. And as we get started out, as I like to do, I want to start and ask you all a question that I hope you could respond to in the chat in a word, in a few words. And as you can see on the screen, that question is, what comes to mind when you think of the causes of climate change? Feel free to drop in more than one response. Stephanie starting us out with people, Kathleen, people, uh, Angelique, industrialization. Stephanie, again, put people in the chat. We're getting that fossil fuels, negligence, greed, poor life choices, corporate greed, like deforestation, too many people. So there's so many things coming up in the chat. Thank you all for putting those in, and feel free to drop those in. I love to ask this question because so often when we think of climate change, we have certain perceptions that come to mind. And in particular, when we think of the causes of climate change, we have certain perceptions coming to mind, including some of the things that you mentioned. But one of the things that we find at Project Drawdown time and time again is that oftentimes when people think of climate change and think of the causes of climate change, they don't think of food. And I did see a couple folks in the chat mentioning food, but they don't think of food, and they don't think of the ways that food are made that contribute to climate change. They definitely don't think of the pathway that food takes to our plates, including the production process and everything else. And if you're someone who thought of anything other than food, well, it's valid because there are many causes of climate change, but also, when it comes to the narratives, when it comes to the stories that are told around climate change and our stories in the media more broadly, food is often overlooked. I know increasingly, especially in climate spaces, we're having conversations about food, which is incredible and it's important, but also looking at US media stories, according to one study from folks at Cornell University in their Center for Sustainability and College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, that back in 2016, when media stories were surveyed, it was found that only 0.2% of those stories mentioned food and climate change together. And in late 2021, early 2022, that same study found that a little bit more, 0.5% or 0.5% of daily news stories reference that link between food and climate. And so while there's been more recognition of the link between food and climate change and how that needs to be discussed, it's still vastly underrepresented in the conversations that are out there for how big of a contributor food is to the climate crisis. We at Project Drawdown view food as the missing piece of the climate conversation. And similar to a number of the responses that you all contribute to the chat, like when we think of the causes of climate change, we do think of fossil fuels, of smokestacks, of factories, of tailpipes, of a number of the things that you put into the chat. But the reality is, another huge, significant contributor to climate change is the global food system, accounting for about between 22 and 33% of emissions from in general in the atmosphere, but 22 to 33% of emissions coming from that global food system. And the reality is, the reason why it's important that we talk about the food system is that we truly can't solve climate change without looking at food and the food system. And so, on this World Food Day, one of the things I want to do is really invite you all to think about food and the role that it plays when it comes to climate. Why should you care about food? How can you take time today, even just to consider the role that food has to play? And even more in the spirit of solutions when it comes to Project Drawdown, how could we look at, listen to, and amplify the voices of people who are contributing to solutions when it comes to food? People like Parker Doe, who you see pictured here, who you'll hear from later as part of our Drawdowns Neighborhood Climate Solutions short docuseries. So at Project Drawdown, as Drew mentioned earlier, we're focused on advancing science-based solutions and sharing insights at the intersection of food, agriculture, land use, and climate change, in addition to so much else that we do, serving as a guide when it comes to climate solutions. And in fact, I'll mention here, as you might hear from Project Drawdown in other spaces and places, that over the next year, we'll be really leaning into food system solutions at Project Drawdown. So you'll hear more and more from us on that. Definitely stay tuned. But there are a lot of solutions when it comes to the food system. And one of the places that we talk so much about those solutions and dive really in depth is the Drawdown Explorer, which is a new tool that recently launched at Project Drawdown. You could find it at drawdown.org/explorer. And actually, just last week, our executive director, Dr. Jonathan Foley, hosted an Ignite webinar introducing the Drawdown Explorer, where he dives deep into the Drawdown Explorer and all of its features. You can find that over on Project Drawdown's YouTube channel if you go to YouTube and search for Project Drawdown and that webinar. But just a bit of an overview of the Explorer, which is where you could find some of the info about food solutions that are part of the stories that we feature today, is that the Drawdown Explorer is the ultimate climate solutions platform, and it's this revolutionary new tool we really feel and have found in sharing it for climate solutions and strategies. So it's focused on using the best available data to provide decision makers with key insights and actionable localized intelligence on the most effective climate solutions, highlighting powerful strategies for scaling those climate solutions globally. And so to put that into perspective, and I love this slide. There have been 22 subject matter experts from around the world working on the Drawdown Explorer, 20,000 plus hours of research, 150 plus solutions analyzed, trillions of data points collected, and countless hours of work going into bringing it to life. And so again, you could check that out at drawdown.org/explorer. And yes, feel free to react with the celebration emojis in the chat. Always love to see that. And again, if you want to check out that webinar after this webinar concludes, we've dropped the link to John's webinar introducing the Drawdown Explorer into the chat. One of my favorite things about the Drawdown Explorer, and again, feel free to react, celebrate in the chat about this, is that the Drawdown Explorer, like all of our Drawdown resources, is free. It's available to use, no paywalls, no subscriptions, no fees, all of that stuff. And again, just a deeper dive into climate solutions that I think really contextualizes the work that we do on the storytelling program. And so while looking at the Drawdown Explorer, you could dive in to any of the solutions, for instance, looking at composting as one of them and deploying centralized composting, which is all about diverting organic waste from landfills, as many of you already know. We on the Stories program really look to connect the dots between like the people who are working on climate solutions and people like you and me and the solutions themselves. People like Anjali Ferrari, who works with LA Compost, where just to give you an idea of their impact, in 2024 alone, they diverted 4.2 million pounds of organics from landfills. That's just in 2024 alone, over years and years and years of doing this impactful work. And so, just a reminder that as we talk about climate solutions, it's critical that we also recognize that people power those climate solutions and move those forward. That's really one of the key points of our Drawdown Stories program at Project Drawdown. We recognize first and foremost something that's often overlooked, unfortunately, outside of spaces like this, that first and foremost, climate solutions exist. And we need to recognize that because often the narratives, the mainstream narratives that are out there are about doom and gloom and the crisis alone, but not about what we can do about the problems. They're not spotlighting the full story, which is not only the solutions that we can bring to life, but the ways that people today are bringing those solutions to life, which goes to another point of our Drawdown Stories program, which is that solutions need people. They don't implement themselves, they don't scale themselves. And so, behind every single breakthrough, every single solution are those people, those individuals and community members who are showing up, who are taking action, who are making change happen, including many of you who are here. And thank you for the amazing work that you're doing to move solutions forward. And then the other point that we really like to hit home within our Drawdown Stories work is that those climate heroes, people that we feature in our Drawdown Stories work, including Drawdown's neighborhood, are people just like each and every one of you. And I love to hit home the point that while we feature folks who have incredible stories, not just when it comes to the work that they do with solutions, but also incredible life stories, that those people featured could be, they could be any one of us. They could be any one of you who are showing up. And on the stories program, we don't view the heroes as exceptional, but rather an example that any of us could follow, a role that any of us could jump into. You can be a climate hero too, in other words, and you probably are a climate hero too. So, again, thank you for those ways of showing up. But our signature initiative within the Drawdown Stories program over the last few years has been the Drawdown's Neighborhood Climate Solutions short docuseries. And you could check out 50 plus episodes to date over at drawdown.org/neighborhood. We've been really thrilled to produce that series in collaboration with Eric Dowds and Dowds Studio, as well as Josna Harris of Change Narrative, who has helped us contextualize the episodes on our website. So if you go to the website, you could find discussion questions, you could find resources from Project Drawdown that are pointing you to dive deeper into climate solutions, or as we say at the end of every episode of Drawdown's Neighborhood, discover solutions and take action. And just a shout out to just a few of the organizations that have highlighted Drawdown's neighborhood to date: the Weather Channel, Nat Geo, the Hollywood Climate Summit, Pinterest, Grist, the list goes on and on. We've been so thrilled to have a range of folks, whether it's colleges and universities, whether it's media outlets, whether it's corporations, government institutions, others, highlight Drawdown's neighborhood as an example of how all of us could be those climate heroes and take action on science-based climate solutions. And so I'm so thankful for that, and always for any opportunity to amplify the work that we're doing. But what's been so incredible is that Drawdown's neighborhood has featured folks in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, folks in Atlanta, Georgia, folks in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, people, climate heroes in New Orleans, as well as our tri-state series, which featured Newark, New Jersey, New Haven, Connecticut, the Bronx, New York. And most recently, our latest released episodes, which came out last year, were from the San Francisco Bay Area. But now, of course, as you all know from the title and description of this webinar, we are really thrilled to be able to feature folks in the Los Angeles area, 7 climate heroes in the LA area who I'm really excited to introduce you to. So here are all of the climate heroes that we featured to date through Drawdown's Neighborhood, from Erica Cochran-Hameen, who you see in the top left, and the first person that we interviewed and featured in Pittsburgh, all the way down to Jessica Kane, who you'll hear from with the organization Agerman. And so I am really thrilled to introduce some of our Drawdown's Neighborhood Los Angeles climate heroes. Uh, who else here is excited to hear from the climate heroes? Put it in the chat if you're excited to hear from, get to know some of the Drawdown's Neighborhood climate heroes. I will talk about this later, but the full episodes of Drawdown's Neighborhood LA come out beginning next week. I'll give you the full release schedule soon, so you'll get to dive into more. But here's just a little bit of a taste of who we'll get to meet. And I'm so thrilled to show a trailer video of the series in a second, but just to tell you about some of the folks, we have Anjali Ferrari with LA Compost doing phenomenal work on her end, Jessica Kane of the organization Agerman, Jemiah Hargens of Crop Swap LA, Amy Rojas of the Friends of Bayona Wetlands, Laura Rink of Heal the Bay and Heal the Bay Aquarium, Parker Doe of New Roots Institute, and Maggie Baird of Support and Feed. So without further ado, here is the trailer of Drawdown's Neighborhood Los Angeles. Let's take a look.
Hello, I'm Anjali Ferrari.
Hi, my name is Parker.
Hi, my name is Amy Rojas.
My name is Maggie Baird.
I'm Jemiah Hargens.
I'm Jessica Kane.
My name is Laura Rink.
And I'm helping the world reach Drawdown.
And I'm helping reach Drawdown.
I'm helping reach Drawdown.
And I am helping reach Drawdown.
And I am helping reach Drawdown
by organizing my community to promote plant-based foods and end factory farming.
By protecting and restoring Los Angeles' last coastal wetlands.
By growing food on unused spaces.
By working for an organization that is committed to diverting millions of pounds of food scraps from landfill.
By teaching, advocating for, and contributing to sustainable aquaculture.
All right, everyone. Can we just give it up for Anjali, Jessica, Jemiah, Amy, Laura, Parker, Maggie, all of them? You're going to hear a little bit more from them in a second, but I always love to see all that love in the chat, not only for the climate solutions work they do, but as you'll hear through the episodes, for their stories, which we'll dive even more deeply into. And feel free to put any comments, any love for them in the chat. I'm sure many of them are tuning in right now. But I'm seeing from Alyssa, just to give a shout out to one of the comments in the chat. Alyssa says, just the kind of hope we need to see. Celeste mentions such important work. And there's so much more. And thank you very much for all of that. Like I love this. I love to hear from all of you with just even those positive reflections. And again, you could check out the trailer. You'll be able to check out the trailer on our Project Drawdown YouTube channel soon. So stay tuned for that. But also you'll be able to check out all of the full episodes in that space. One of the things I'll also just shout out before going on to the next place here is that oftentimes I talk about the importance of storytelling, and I'm happy to talk more about storytelling when we get to questions in just a little bit, but oftentimes I talk about the importance of storytelling, and I reference just the fact that so often we lead with just the crisis, just the doom and gloom, and even just the technical aspects of climate solutions, which are really important, and we need to acknowledge these things. It's also so critical that we realize that when we lead with doom and gloom, or when we lead with things that aren't these more human elements, it often misses people or doesn't connect with them in the same ways that stories do. And the way that we choose to highlight stories at Project Drawdown is telling stories that are simple and relatable and understandable. So yes, we're talking about about the broader climate solutions, but through the lens of an individual, like one of the folks that you see here. We are featuring social elements, the stories we tell. So who are these characters that you relate to? What are elements of who they are and why they do what they do that we decide to showcase? That's all out there so we can help folks further connect. And then also, we not only want to signal progress when it comes to the actual impact people are making and the solutions and the impact when it comes to emissions in particular, but also that we want to show how folks are supporting the benefits of solutions or other benefits of solutions like health, like jobs, like equity, and so on and so forth within their communities. So thanks again for folks with the love in the chat. And as I continue on, I actually want to give you a bit more time to hear from folks and how their work contributes to climate solutions. And so I know earlier I was talking about the Drawdown Explorer a bit, and just to show you a bit of the experience with the Explorer to get to some of these food-related solutions, it's really simple. Again, go to drawdown.org/explorer. You could filter by solution sector, and so here are some of the solutions that are featured in the Drawdowns Neighborhood series and otherwise. The wonderful science team at Project Drawdown is also building out these solutions even more. So you see a bunch of the solutions already, but we'll be adding more and more with time. So stay tuned for that. But some of the solutions that are featured in this series across either one or more of the episodes are things like reducing food waste and loss, which we know contributes to, well, I should say food waste and loss contributes to 1/3 or so, or about 1/3 of emissions in the atmosphere. I meant to also mention that about 1/3 of all food produced from human consumption is lost or wasted. And so food waste and loss, as we know, is one of the biggest contributors to this issue when it comes to food. Improving diets is also something you'll hear about a lot in the series, thinking about plant-rich diets and the like. We also talk about increased centralized composting, which Anjali and others are working on. Protecting coastal wetlands and improving aquaculture is another one that comes up here. And so without further ado, I'm going to play a video, kind of a cut of a bunch of the different Drawdowns neighborhood climate heroes talking about the ways that their work is a climate solution. So let's take a look. How is the work you do a climate solution?
Composting, I think of it from many different avenues of being a climate solution. I mean, of course, diverting waste from landfill, organics and food scraps produce methane, which is 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide and like better at trapping heat.
At the turn of the 20th century, we actually had, soil had about 6% carbon. Now it's less than 1%. So that's where we say putting that carbon back into the soil is that climate change work.
We were home to the second largest landfill next to Vegas up until 2013. And that landfill is called La Puente landfill. It's closed now because it's at capacity. And that technically was like one of our closest landfills in LA. Yeah. And now all of that material is being pumped out. By having this decentralized model and trying to have these like compost hubs and food scrap drop-off locations, we're doing our best by keeping vehicles and trucks off the road. But then in addition to just like one of the most beautiful byproducts of the compost process is the finished product of compost.
You can see it happening. We have tests now that show that it's working, and people can actually see that benefit if they start applying those products themselves. So we have multiple yards throughout California where we do the processing, and some of them are sites for people to go and purchase product. And then if they're going to plant anything, they can stop by the product side and pick up some compost mulch or other soil amendments. You can start at home by appropriately sorting out your green and food waste. If you have green waste, start creating that pile and start learning how to control those piles at home. And once you have finished product, just apply that into your soil.
Compost can hold 10 times its weight in water. So you can literally take a bucket of compost and pour a gallon of water on it, and all of it will be absorbed.
Wow.
Its water holding capacity is insane and amazing. Compost it's a part of the soil structure. So it actually will help plants and trees better absorb nutrients. You know, like you can buy fertilizer, but if the soil doesn't have the structure for it to actually absorb and hold on and for the roots to be able to bring that up into the plant or tree, it's really not gonna be a benefit. So there's nothing that I can say bad about compost.
On the rainwater aspect, by collecting rainwater, now we have 11,000 gallons of rainwater between our microfarms. And that is, you know, partially used to grow the food, but in the case of an environmental catastrophe of fires, firefighters can tap into this exact tank and put out the houses around us if they needed to. And recently we experienced fires where firefighters ran out of water in some areas. What we're trying to do is create a water resilience network. We're solving multiple problems all at once, all by leveraging the gifts of nature that are coming every day. So here is a living, visible example to both kids and adults of what a real effort is being put forward into growing food and collecting water and sharing that with the community.
This is the last coastal wetlands of Los Angeles, and just within Southern California, we've lost about 95% of our wetlands. These ecosystems, they provide a lot of not only ecosystem services to us as humans, right? Like they're an excellent flood buffer, they help filter water. Wetlands are a very effective carbon sink. So they're able to absorb and store a lot of the carbon that's in the atmosphere, which directly impacts climate change and it helps to reduce that. I've fallen in love with the space, and I would like to hope I've played a part in restoring the wetlands bit by bit. But yeah, ultimately I'd love to see this place restored, and if not me, then maybe my grandchildren or something. But this is something that I'm very passionate about and would love to see happen.
One of the projects that I'm really focused on right now and initiatives is sustainable aquaculture, and it's the growing of aquatic organisms, whether that's fish, algae, kelp, or shellfish, so your mussels, crustaceans, in a controlled environment. So it implies intervention. You're not just going out and taking these animals from the wild, you're actually helping them grow at some point in their life cycle. So not only are we developing that here at Heal the Bay, expanding our Aqua Lab to support increased aquaculture, I also teach at Santa Monica College Intro to Aquaculture, and this is part of a larger Blue Economy initiative to provide workforce training to students so that they have easier entry into the blue economy and this field. And then blue economy is a larger overarching term to describe any job that might be associated with the ocean or freshwater resources that contributes to its conservation and protection. That's the key, the conservation and protection part, right? We're not just reaping resources from these waterways. We are working to protect them while creating economic opportunity. And sustainable aquaculture is where I feel my work most contributes to climate initiatives.
Every time you can plant that seed and open someone's eyes and say, hey, did you know that if you change from an omnivorous meal to a plant-based meal, one meal a day for 30 days, you can create a massive change.
We had 2,300 high school students coming to UCLA, and I thought, if these students are coming to debate global issues like climate change, let's show them a climate solution. So instead of forcing everyone to eat this vegan meal, I said that the default option is plant-based. And this is why, because of the environment, because of cultural dietary restrictions, because of X, Y, and Z UN recommendations. If you'd like to opt into meat or dairy, check here. If not, you'll get the default option, which is plant-based. And about 70% of people stuck with the default. And it was easy for them to do that, and it was not socially weird for them to do that. And our conference saved 50,000 gallons of water, 1,000 pounds of CO2. Yeah, thank you.
That's awesome.
And even if they didn't eat that way, that gets the conversation going about what our food choices mean and the impact you can have when the cultural norms shift.
And we let fans know that if 10,000 people in an arena do that, that's collectively 7 million gallons of water saved in 30 days. Yeah, not to mention all the other savings of that. But as part of Billy's tour in 2022, we were able to increase our presence in 11 cities, feed people in all stops of the tour, table at Billy's tours, to talk to fans about the climate crisis. And then we've worked with many, many other artists since then. We're on tour with Phineas right now. We've worked with Paramore and Metallica, Blink-182. We've done plant-based food drives with Coldplay and Dave Matthews. So really connecting the dots is really what we're all about. The intersection of the climate crisis and food equity and food insecurity, community support. That is where we live, is really entirely at the intersection. And so now being able to meet fans and music lovers and really bring them into the conversation to be a part of that is just a massive amplification for us.
Again, I'm so grateful for all of our Drawdowns neighborhood, Los Angeles climate heroes, all of them for not only sharing their stories, but sharing the work that they do. That's a bit of a clip of the work, but I can't stress enough how incredible their personal stories are, the things that they have faced and overcome to show up and do this work. And one question I have for all of you, just based on what you already saw, without getting the full dive into their stories and their full episodes, is that like, what's one thing that's inspired you from their stories so far? Feel free to drop that in the chat. Would love to see some of the things that jump out already. Again, only recognizing that you've only gotten a sneak peek of their work and their stories, but just reflecting on their stories so far. I mean, I think one thing that we all can relate to is that it it's tough. Like the world has a lot going on in it, of course, and it has always had a lot going on, and I think we all feel that day to day. But the ways that people still show up in the face of that's really incredible. In Los Angeles, in particular, I'll point out that we filmed these episodes of Drawdown's Neighborhood, had these conversations after the wildfires really raged at the start of this year, and one of the things that jumps out to me is that people were not only still eager to share their stories, but more eager than ever in many cases to share their stories, to be heard, to be amplified, to have this work when it comes to climate solutions centered and highlighted more than ever before. And so just to as you watch these different episodes as they come out, not only next week, but over the next several weeks, I hope that you also recognize that, yeah, while there's so much weight that each person carries into those conversations, that they still show up with hope. They still show up making a positive impact. And thank you all again for just populating the chat with so many responses to this. What's one thing that inspired you from their stories? Celeste mentions that they're so passionate about their work, right? There's passion for that work. And again, one of the things that jumps out to me is how each person has sort of found their own way, their own personally meaningful way of showing up. So Laura Rink, for instance, who you heard from, who works at Heal the Bay, on aquaculture and so many solutions as it relates to our oceans and our water, is someone who grew up passionate about water and being in the water and experiencing it. And so the fact that she could turn that into a career where she's making a big impact, not only for herself and her community, but for our world, is really meaningful. Anna mentions that there are so many ways to contribute to the fight. Whatever passion you have, you can make it a climate passion. The use of water from the urban farm for firefighting. Yeah, that also jumps out to me. And one of the things I meant to point out even before going into the clip is that it's so powerful that people can find ways not only to do work that's reducing emissions in the atmosphere and making an impact that way, but it's a response or helping respond to the threat of wildfires. It's helping build stronger communities. It's helping educate the next generation as they come up. Laura mentions diverting food waste from landfills. Cher mentions being impressed that there's so much being done. Janice mentions being in happy tears. Eric mentions that they're pioneers and it's not easy being on the forefront of positive change. It's definitely not easy. And yet, not only are they doing it, not only have the Now 60 plus folks featured in Drawdown's neighborhood done it, but I know many of you are showing up and making that impact. And again, many of you have just as powerful stories to share. So many other great comments that I'm going to have to make sure to read after this, because I want to make sure that we have time to get to the end here, and also for me to answer some questions about storytelling. And before I go on, I'll also say, as Drew mentioned at the beginning, use the Q&A box to add in questions, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. But one of the things I want to encourage you all to do, just as you take your next steps when it comes to climate solutions, but also as you look to hear about Drawdown's neighborhood as the episodes come out, is that if you're not already, be sure that you are subscribed to Project Drawdown's newsletter over at drawdown.org/slash newsletter slash dash sign up, or I should say drawdown.org/slash newsletter dash sign dash up. Easy for me to say. And we could also put that link in the chat. But I mentioned that because that's where we'll be sharing the episodes of Drawdown's neighborhood as those come out every other week. And they'll also be available at drawdown.org/neighborhood, as well as on our YouTube channel. But our newsletters are best place to stay up to date on all things Project Drawdown, whether that's the Drawdown Explorer, whether that's the latest stories that we're releasing, and the like. And again, can't encourage that enough for folks to stay up to date on what we're up to. But now I'm really thrilled to share the release schedule of these episodes of Drawdown's Neighborhood. Whenever they come out, they're going to be coming out at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern on Wednesdays. So the first 3 episodes will drop at the same time on Wednesday, October 22nd. So coming up in less than a week. It's very exciting. And then we'll have episodes with each other climate hero coming out at that same time on October 29th, November 5th, November 12th, and November 19th. And so we're so thrilled to have you checking out those episodes as they drop, but not only watching and listening to the episodes and hearing the stories featured. One of the things that's so critical, especially in a world where so often the narrative is one of doom and gloom and the crisis, that we want you to share these stories. It's important for not just all of us in this webinar and in this conversation to know about solutions and people taking action, but it's also important that we let our friends, our families, our coworkers, let people know that not only are solutions a reality, but people like us are bringing those solutions to life each and every day. And so we really count on you to help spread the word, not only about climate solutions more broadly and a bunch of the tools that Project Drawdown shares, but about stories of folks like Anjali, Jessica, Jemiah, Amy, Laura, Parker, and Maggie. And so again, you could check those out at drawdown.org/neighborhood, but if you're on our newsletter, you'll hear about those episodes as they drop over the next several weeks. And again, if you're plugged into Project Drawdown social media, including our YouTube channel and otherwise, you'll hear more about these episodes dropping as they are released. So thanks again to everyone for being part of the webinar. Now I'm going to get to questions that my wonderful teammate, our storytelling coordinator, Drew Arietta, is teeing up. No clue what he's going to ask, but thanks for all the questions.
Let's also give it up for Matt Scott for such an incredible presentation, really showcasing the work that we're doing. And great job, Matt. Really excited to get these stories out there and have people hear them and understand the work and the climate solutions work that folks are doing. And so I'm going to, first question for you, Matt. There was a question about how is Project Drawdown combating our current food system with plant-based foods as a climate solutions? I know you brought that up a bit in your presentation. Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, so I think just to talk about Project Drawdown more broadly and preview some of the resources, because I think one of the best ways that you could engage with Project Drawdown is by diving deeper into the various resources we have. At Project Drawdown, we talk about 3 S's when it comes to climate solutions: the science of climate solutions, the stakeholders when it comes to climate solutions, and the stories. And so where I focus is on the storytelling front. How do we bring to life the climate solutions and the work that's happening on a daily basis, and the work that many of the stakeholders are doing, or work that community members are doing when it comes to solutions? And so what I would point people to, other than the Drawdown Explorer, which I've pointed to a number of times, and more specifically, the Explorer solution of improving diets, which dives very deep into the plant-based food system, uh, is that, like, we do so much to talk about we've done so much to talk about food to date on the climate solutions front. There are a number of resources out there. So I think of webinars that we've put on over the last year in particular. And I also think of a page that we have up at the Project Drawdown website, for the Drawdown Food Initiative. So dive into the Drawdown Explorer, dive into Drawdown Food, check out some of the webinars and other pieces that we put out there about the food system, and that will give you the most comprehensive answers when it comes to how Project Drawdown is showing up for various solutions, but including the plant-based food system.
Wonderful. What are some ways you recommend folks who are watching today can use these stories? What are some ways you recommend they can be shared?
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating. One of the most, like, general things I would say is to recognize that each and every one of us has a sphere of influence. Each and every one of us has a platform, whether that is, like, our family around the dinner table, or whether that's reaching many folks on LinkedIn or on Twitter or on Instagram and spreading the word. And so I often just encourage folks not to underestimate the power that they have with sharing something like this work, whether it's our Project Drawdown work more broadly, or whether it's our storytelling work, or even this webinar, because that reaches so many folks who wouldn't know about the work otherwise. And so I would say, to one, think about what platforms and spaces you have, whether you're part of a community that's either interested in climate solutions, or a community that might be interested in climate solutions and hearing about these stories, whether it's your social media, personally or professionally, like, using those things to even put out one post or spread the word, or imagine you sharing Project Drawdown's posts about each of the Drawdown's neighborhood episodes on your social media. That goes a long way. I will also add that a number of folks, including some of the folks that I'm seeing in the chat here, I know have brought these stories to their classrooms and their communities. So I think of the formal and informal educators. I also think of folks who lead, like, employee resource groups or other communities where they bring people together. And I found time and time again that the stories that we produce on the Drawdowns Neighborhood docuseries can be used and have been used as a place to open up conversation and discussion about those climate solutions, about the viewers' stories, and how they um, might relate to the characters featured, or what their roles can be when it comes to climate. So you can share these episodes and help people learn about the heroes featured, about the solutions featured. That's great. You could also use them to facilitate a dialogue or drive conversation. I'm seeing, for instance, Mark, who is with the California State University system, mentions that he loves using Drawdown videos in his classroom. And I know a number of folks have been really big on using Drawdown as this guide and a resource when it comes to solutions. So figure out what works best for you and your community, but also recognize that something as simple as hitting share actually does go a long way.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt. I'm always inspired and I love all the different ways these stories and documentaries show up in the world. Question we got is, what is the best way to get involved in my local area on issues relating to food and climate?
That's a great question. And I often, and this is one of the things I love about Drawdown's neighborhood, is that I often find that I look to people locally who have the best, kind of the best sense or the best pulse of what's going on. So a general piece of advice before I get to a more specific tool I would recommend that might be helpful is that I think looking to, similar to what we do on the Drawdown Stories program, looking to those who are taking action, looking to the helpers and finding out from them about opportunities to get involved is really important. With each of the Drawdowns neighborhood episodes, one of the closing questions that I ask is about how people could plug into and support the work that that person's doing or support work on that climate solution in that community. And so that's one place I would point to. In addition to also mentioning again that with each Drawdowns neighborhood episode, there are different resources that you could check out and that might help answer that question. But I have to give a shout out to Shift, the super high impact initiative for fixing tomorrow. Shift, which is propelled by climate scientist Kimberly Nicholas and is something that we've been in partnership with at Project Drawdown since its launch last month. And Shift really helps folks understand what steps they could take when it comes to climate action. So I know I've talked a bunch about the Drawdown Explorer, but Shift is also another great way of understanding what what your sphere of influence, what your leverage points are when it comes to action. But yeah, be in community with the community members around you, and that could give you a lot of answers about how to show up. I'll also say that I often like to show and plug the climate action Venn diagram, which is popularized by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and talks about three areas within the Venn diagram of what brings you joy, what are you good at, and what are the problems you want to solve. And at the heart of that's where your climate action takes place. And so while there are so many things that are important to do, including with our food system that can be high impact, or to borrow from Kimberly and Nicholas, super high impact. It's also important just to recognize that you can use your role, your interests, your passion, your skills, what brings you joy, and the problems you care about to make that impact you want to make. So more of a general answer, but again, just a plug for Shift and also for connecting with your local community members.
Awesome. Love that. The question here is more about sort of your approach in terms of the interviews, and if you have a sort of a favorite, what's your favorite question to ask these everyday climate heroes?
There are so many questions, and one of them that I always start out with is the question, "Who are you?" Which you didn't see in the clips here, but to start out one of those interviews or conversations with the question, "Who are you?" is really fascinating because it sort of just lays on the table, you know, all of the identities that someone brings as they show up to the work they do. And like oftentimes I'll ask that question and someone will talk about being a parent. They'll talk about, like what they're passionate about outside of work. They'll obviously talk about their roles, but it goes so much deeper than that. And, you know, I I bring that up because it's helpful for folks to see that the people who are working on climate solutions, one, are people, and they're people just like them who are making a positive impact. So, who are you definitely is one question that jumps out to me, and it's how all of our episodes start out. It sort of helps immediately contextualize like how this person is showing up and a little bit of why they decide to do the work they do, which is what we get into in the episodes. So again, you saw a bit of the climate solutions they work on, but that's my favorite question to start out with, and it's always interesting to see and then unpack who people are and be reminded that like, oh, I relate to that piece of them and so many others, including all of the folks who've been exposed to Drawdown's neighborhood over the last several years, that so many others relate to those things too.
Wonderful. Um, Sort of a question, sort of thinking about the moment in time that we're in right now. What gives you hope right now in the intersection of food, climate, and storytelling?
I love that question. And I hope that all the folks who are here today could relate to this. What gives me hope is people. It's people taking action and recognizing that one, people are taking action, and two, that people are actually making an impact with that action that they're taking to bring climate solutions to life. I love highlighting these Drawdowns neighborhood stories because one of the things you see is not only how folks are developing and building and scaling solutions, but also you're seeing in their work that even as they work toward a broader goal of like stopping climate change, they're also feeding people in many cases. They're building healthier communities. They're increasing safety and security of their communities. They're making their cities more bikeable or walkable or just easier to get around and more pleasant to live in. And that's the part that really jumps out to me is that those solutions are like happening now. They're making an impact now. It's easy to overlook that at times, but when we zoom in and look at the work that that any one person is doing, they're benefiting so many lives even as we speak right now.
Awesome. Love that. Sort of a somewhat similar question, but what was it? Is there, doing these interviews, I know the interviews themselves are much longer and they're sort of condensed. But was there a common challenge that came up that you picked up from the folks that you're interviewing that was uncovered through their work or their personal journeys um, that you learned from during the interviews?
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say that that's necessarily Los Angeles specific, but something that relates to all of our 62 interviews of Drawdown's neighborhood to date and 62 episodes. That this work is hard. It's not easy to show up and encounter the reality when it comes to the issues, that we face when it comes to climate. And yet we also all in doing this work acknowledge solutions, acknowledge the work that it takes to bring them to life. And again, it's this thing that inspires me is seeing people show up with hope, seeing people show up contributing to those climate solutions, even in the face of a challenging world at times on a number of fronts. And so while the issues are real, while the problems are real, the crisis is very real, of course, that the solutions, what we could do about those, and the ways that we could tap into our own unique superpowers to do something, that's a reality. Like the people that you see featured in Drawdown's neighborhood, and I'm sure many other folks who are in attendance right now, they don't let the problems or the challenges stop them. Instead, they use that as fuel in many cases, or at least acknowledge the reality and then find creative ways to problem solve and continue to make an impact and bring climate solutions to life, accelerate climate solutions, like even in the face of those things. So we all know the challenges, even on a personal level. I'm sure many people here could think of challenges that you have in showing up to do the impactful work that you're doing. But this work and climate solutions in particular are so important that people find a way. They find a way in the face of those challenges. Thanks for that question, Drew.
Yeah, of course. And as sort of as we unfortunately are wrapping up here, as we come to the end of the hour, I have a question about what's next for Drawdown's neighborhood. Are there plans for future cities, themes, or things we'd like to explore through the documentary?
Stay tuned. Definitely stay tuned on what's to come for Drawdown Stories and Drawdown's neighborhood. Obviously, what's next more immediately is releasing the 7 episodes of Drawdown's Neighborhood LA. So you could check those out beginning October 22nd with the first 3 episodes. And again, weekly, those episodes will come out. And I love to see this anytime that we have it. If anyone wants us to bring Drawdown's Neighborhood where they are, feel free to put it in the chat. Jennifer mentions like come to Canada, so much appreciated, Jennifer. And we'll kind of see how our work continues to grow and develop. But I think what's so important that I want to underscore is that we need folks like all of you and like your networks to show up for the storytelling work that we're doing, whether that's watching, whether that's amplifying, whether that's bringing it to your communities in some way, to your classrooms in some way, wherever you are. also, like, having partners and collaborators goes such a long way. I mentioned a number of the folks like the Weather Channel, Nat Geo, Grist, and many others who have showed up to help amplify this work or serve as platforms for this work in a variety of ways. And we need all of that. And so if that's something that you are doing, well, amazing. We love that so much. And also, you could reach out to Project Drawdown and reach out to me and to Drew in particular. Um, I'm sure that the inbox will probably be busy as I mentioned this, but stories@drawdown.org is one way that you could get in touch with our team if there are ways that you want to amplify the series. You don't need to ask us for permission to share and amplify the series, but it's always nice for us to hear about ways that you are sharing this really important work of people bring climate solutions to life each and every day. And again, drawdown.org/neighborhood is one place you could find our work. Drawdown.org/stories is a broader place for an overview of our storytelling work. And thanks again, Drew, for all of those amazing questions and for all of you for tuning in today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. And let's give it up for Matt for the wonderful presentation, all the questions he thoroughly answered. And thank you everyone who attended today for taking time to learn more about where food and climate intersect, and how to use stories to do that. And so we really deeply appreciate you all, spending this past hour with us. It was a joy hearing from Matt and also getting questions and watching the chat. And we really appreciate it. As a nonprofit organization that depends on support from individuals like you, I'd like to ask you to please consider making a donation to Project Drawdown. Your contribution will be used to stand up for science and promote bold climate action in the year ahead. So thank you
Yeah,
for that.
I just wanted to underscore that too. Like, please, like, donate, support what we're doing. Obviously, it's a tough time to say the least when it comes to climate and its state in our world. And so anything that you could do to show up for that, show up for our work and support, including our storytelling work, it really means the world and will be much, much appreciated. So thanks, Drew, for including that.
Of course. And thank you once again for everyone for being here. Thank you, Matt. We'll be sending out a recording of today's webinar in a couple of days, and we really look forward to seeing you at our next Drawdown Ignite webinar. Thanks everyone for being here today. Appreciate you.
Thank you, everyone.